Today, we're pushing Choo Choo Charles to the limit. Quite literally an attempt to break the game in many, many ways. Normally, there's just one demonic train to worry about, but we're going to be turning this island upside down. From trying to ruin the game's intro, to summoning an army of cultists, to trying to send Charles to the moon. Oh yeah, there's also this. Don't ask me what the heck that is. I'll try to explain it in a little bit. Here are 5 strange experiments in Choo Choo Charles, so I hope you enjoy. Experiment 1. So what if the cultists knew that Eugene was coming back to the island with the monster hunter? So the game starts with Eugene rowing us to the island, but all around us we have these rocks. So what if the cultists were waiting on these rocks, ready to attack the moment we got near the island? So we load in a bunch of cultists on the rock and the dock that we're going to. And so we're coming in, rowing ever so slowly, and we can see all the cultists waiting for us. And it only takes a moment before they start shooting at us. And not long after that, we immediately die. Now, I was curious about dying in the boat, but actually what does happen is it just restarts this scene again. However, I realized something very, very interesting, so I wanted to do this again. So the mob is waiting for us once again, and we're coming back through. But Eugene doesn't care because he's on a mission. And as we're coming in, some of the cultists are even slipping off the rock and landing on the ocean floor too. But of course, while Eugene's rowing, we get killed again. But this time, I choose not to reload. And at this point, we can turn off the restart menu because Eugene is still carrying out his cutscene. He doesn't even care that we're dead. But what I find really interesting is that the dock unloads when we do die. And alongside this, a lot of the cultists begin jumping off the rock into the ocean to run for land underwater. It's pretty strange because they start all moving, going into the ocean, and they're all clumping up near the exit of the beach. So when Eugene got to the dock, he actually jumped out of the boat and he fell to the ocean floor. And he stood there as he cocked his head, looking at the giant mob in front of him before he just unloads. The dude was straight up like, peace, and he just faded away because he was not dealing with that. And so we can find Eugene floating up above the water where he normally stands next to that door on the dock. And this makes sense because this was the next logical step in his programming, because this is where he then runs up to the train shack after the player opens that door. And while Eugene's doing all of this, the cultists start to retreat back around the island. They're actually moving underwater alongside the beach, far away from the dock where we were at. And they're getting stuck on the collider that's around the island that prevents objects from entering the ocean. This is the invisible barrier that wraps around the island that prevents the player from entering the water. But now let's rewind time and throw Charles on those rocks. There's something funny about Eugene saying they call him Charles, and Charles is literally sitting right there on the rock in the water waiting for them to come to the island. Now, Charles turns around and we just canoe right through him. This is weird, but not exactly what we want. So we add a few more Charles, and the one is staring right at us as we canoe on by. The dock is loaded with Charles though, so we get knocked out of the boat immediately, and we get thrown across the dock by the damage. But of course, the true MVP Eugene walks on by without even acknowledging the demonic trains. But the Charles begin to warp around due to their odd placement, and I take enough damage to get jump scared. What's interesting is the Charles that I actually die at is the one stored in the center of the island. The game warps me all the way across this map to this Charles who is not activated yet and is stored inside this rectangle. This is the Charles that eventually gets pulled from this holding cell once we encounter him for the first time with Eugene. It's the Charles encounter that kills Eugene that ultimately spawns Choo Choo Charles on the map and makes them leave this holding container. But back by the dock unloads and we have several Charles just floating in the air, with another that is late to the party. But let's move on to experiment 2. What if Eugene died before leaving the train station? So normally we have a set series of events that must be followed before Eugene meets his end. But let's try changing that. We're going to leave Eugene on the dock and we are going to warp over to the train shed. So now this puts us inside the train shed without Eugene, and as you can see, he's nowhere to be found. But as soon as we get off that gun, the lad magically appears inside the train. But this is okay. This is totally okay because the game logic is technically out of order at this point. So this is where I want to try to experiment around and see what happens. So we break through the doorway out of the shed, and while it's happening, we save and quit and reload, and unfortunately nothing happens by doing so. So now instead, we're going to put Charles behind the train within the shed. But as you can see, Charles isn't cooperating. I spawned a few and they got stuck, and the one that wasn't stuck hit me and then ran through a wall and is now stuck outside the building. However, this one that's stuck in the ground we can farm scraps from by damaging him with a machine gun. But little did I know that Eugene was actually already dead. Eugene is looking all well and good, but as soon as the train collides with a wall, our old lad gets fists to the North Star and dies immediately.
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
Or, so I thought? Actually, Eugene gets cloned, and his clone dies on spawn. The regular Eugene is still alive in the train, but there's another Eugene on the ground. He starts doing his monologue as he dies, but he never was attacked by Charles, so his body doesn't have a huge gash in it. So Eugene dies as usual, but his better half is still on the train as we open fire on the Eugene clone. As we move forward, we eventually trigger the normal Charles spawn, but it's totally messed up due to all the copies of Charles that I loaded on the map. Eventually, one of the Charles does come after us, but this is when I realized Eugene is truly special. For one, for some reason, the bullets have this magic stopping power. When Charles gets hit with a shot, he staggers hardcore and stops moving. It's almost like the normal flinching animation is like amplified times the amount of Charles that are on the map. But the other interesting thing is that Eugene actually cannot die. He has infinite HP due to being logic locked. This is because he's stuck mid-conversation, and at this point, he's supposed to carry out a few more lines of dialogue before he dies. So no amount of damage will defeat him. After all, how can you kill someone who is already dead? Eventually though, I kick the bucket from all the damage, and Eugene is gone without a trace. Experiment 3. What if we defeated like 100 or so cultists at once in slow motion? So we're gonna go back to that train shed, and we're gonna make a makeshift blockade using old train pieces. So even though these train carts have holes in them that can be walked through by the player, cultists don't know how to jump, so they actually won't walk through this. And then we spawn in the cultists, as they flow in one by one, spawning from the center point. And because they have not detected the player, they're actually gonna try wandering back to the center of the island. They also start flying around and get stuck on the ceiling, and some are getting pushed through the walls. But then one of them spots me on the roof, and suddenly all of them become aggressive as I continue to load in more and more. They are surrounding my train, which is a problem, and I'm a bit afraid to go down to it. But we're gonna try anyways. I make my way down, and I try hopping on top of the train, but I get absolutely destroyed. So let's try doing this while removing their ability to move and shoot. This time I slowly load these peeps in, and the crowd eventually gets pretty large. In the middle of creating my army, Charles attacks us though, and I was worried he was going to destroy my pack of cultists, and I take shelter on the roof while Charles runs into the crowd. However, he cannot hurt them because they are acting sort of like a giant barricade. Because they are inactive, the cultists will not flee, but also Charles cannot do anything with them. It took a while, but Charles eventually gets around this giant blockade of dudes, and thankfully, he retreats. But our massive army of cultists is here, and now it's time for the fun part. We turn the game speed down to super slow motion as we attack this mob of cultists with our train. Look how we are barely moving. The suspense is killing me. But as soon as they get hit, we can see them all exploding in bullet time. It's kind of glorious and awful at the same time. This cultist explosion begins to bring my PC to a crawl, as the sheer amount of particle effects is becoming too much for the game to handle. Eventually the game just breaks, and my camera gets stuck up in the sky as the map glitches out. Fear not though, as my camera eventually recovers, and what we are left with looks like a giant pile of meat and potato chips. I mean seriously, I think it's supposed to be bone pieces, but they look like giant potato slices. Cultists are thrown everywhere, and the aftermath is super intense. And the last cultist flies through the air outside the building. But we are far from done. Let's create another giant pile. So now we have a massive pile of cultists with their AI still intact, and we will be charging them in the train. I start firing to draw their fury, and eventually the massive horde notices me. So I know cultists can only fire at me if we are in line of sight. So I begin to walk back and forth, left and right in the train so that they can't lock onto me and shoot. And you know, this works for a while. It prevents them from shooting at me, and I'm just mowing down cultists one by one. And this is all well and good, except for the fact that I'm an idiot, and I decide to get on the gun, and the second I do this, I instantly die because my player position is locked in place. And they all simultaneously shoot me at once, and it's game over. But even though I'm dead, the train keeps moving behind the scenes, despite my body staying behind. And as you can see, the remaining cultists, who are few in number, are actually trying to swarm where my body should be. However, it is now time to put the cultists aside and move on to Experiment 4, which is honestly, very terrifying. Experiment 4, fusing 20 Charles into one terrifying monster. So this is actually an offshoot of the next experiment, but man, I had to talk about it. So summoning multiple enemies to one location in a short period of time can cause them to go flying. This is how some cultists got stuck in the ceiling in a previous experiment. But if the game speed is reduced significantly when Charles is being spawned into the same spot as other Charles, well, this happens. The Charles actually never separate, and instead, they fuse into this horrifying blocky monster. Take a listen to how awful this Giga Chad sounds as it builds up its various legs. Optimus Charles Prime is on the roof looking straight up like a Roblox monster. So at this point, I ended up pulling the train back into the train station slowly underneath this behemoth. And I wanted to shoot this monster through the roof inside the train station. But it's kind of futile because only one of the 20 Charles is actually taking damage this way. So of course, this calls for a roof inspection. But not before a wild Charles attacks my train. Honestly, this made me jump because I had no idea he was right there. And so I'm about to die, and I get off my train, but for some reason, this Charles just keeps attacking the train. He never comes after me, so I retreat back into the train shed and I take shelter, and I realize that I'm not taking any damage. So normally, Charles will go after the player, and by attacking the train, we eventually take damage once the train's health is gone. But in this situation, Charles just wanted to destroy my train, so he was attacking my train forever, and my train is getting obliterated. But up here where I am, I'm actually restoring health. So I kinda have nothing to worry about. So I go onto the roof and I'm approaching this stacked monster. So I'm standing up here thinking about what I should do. And the only thing I can think of is to sacrifice myself to this divine cosmic entity. And touching this monster, I take so much damage, I just instantly die. But what's interesting is I don't die here. I get warped over to the Charles on the ground for the jump scare, which is kind of bizarre. But my death deletes the train station, so Omega Charles can take flight, and we can all bask in his glory. He looks so, magnificent and broken. Mostly broken. But like I said, this Charles was a mistake. So now it's time to send Charles to the moon in our 5th experiment. So this setup is very similar to creating the Omega Charles that I just showed off, except it's just spaced out differently and with less trains. So before, the volume of Charles kept them all stuck together because they were spawned in so rapid fire that they didn't have time to actually conform to their position. But now we're giving them enough time so they can spawn in and make an adjustment before the next Charles appears. And this allows them to actually push each other and interact with the physics of the other Charles. And what we're left with is anti-gravity spider trains. Essentially, the momentum causes the trains up top to enter a glitched falling state, where their momentum propels them forward, usually up into the sky. And this force of movement does not wear off. It defies gravity, as these spider trains are sent upwards towards space. As time goes on, they wander farther and farther away, seeking out potential life on other planets. It's actually, kinda spooky looking. It's like they're being picked up by a tractor beam or something. And just like a satellite moving through space, they will wander to the edges of the universe, eventually becoming little red dots in the sky. Trying to hit them from the ground is impossible at this point, as we're trying to hit microscopic red specks up in the air. But from here, these Charles will explore the universe, and this brings our experiments to a close. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe now if you did, and I'll see you all very soon in my next game-breaking video. Cheers!